Imagine you just survived years of civil war
Yeah.
and brutal POW camps,
Wow.
only to die just miles from home
Oh my God.
in the worst maritime disaster in U.S. history.
Really?
Most people have never even heard of the Sultana steamboat.
Oh, that's interesting.
Today we're diving deep into the story of the Sultana,
Okay.
a story of hope and greed and unimaginable tragedy.
I think that this story really highlights how even amidst momentous historical events, individual stories of human suffering can get lost.
Yeah.
While the nation was focused on Lincoln's assassination and the war's end, the Sultana disaster unfolded almost unnoticed, claiming more lives than the Titanic.
Wow. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
A tragedy of this magnitude,
Yeah,
practically erased from history.
it is.
So let's unpack what happened.
Okay.
Starting with the Sultana itself.
Right.
What kind of vessel was she?
The Sultana was built for the cotton trade, a 260-foot side-wheel steamboat, considered quite advanced for her time.
Okay.
Ironically, she was equipped with several safety features.
Very really.
Safety gauges on the boilers, fire pumps, hundreds of feet of fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
It's a grim reminder that even with precautions in place,
Yeah.
human error and greed can have catastrophic consequences.
Okay, so we have this seemingly well-equipped steamboat
Right?
poised to bring soldiers home. Where does the story take a turn for the worse?
The turning point comes at Vicksburg, Mississippi.
Okay.
Thousands of recently released Union soldiers were gathered there,
Rough.
desperate to return home.
Yeah.
The Sultana, though meant for cargo, was contracted to transport these troops, a decision driven by profit.
Mm-hmm.
The government was paying $5 per head for each soldier transported,
Wow.
creating a dangerous incentive for overcrowding.
That's a pretty hefty sum for the time.
Yeah,
It sounds like this payment structure really set the stage for disaster.
exactly. You can see how this payment structure encouraged steamboat operators to prioritize profit over safety. It was a system ripe for abuse.
Wow.
And in the case of the Sultana, this profit motive led to a series of fatal decisions. The most critical one involved the ship's boilers.
Ah, the boilers. I've heard they played a central role in this tragedy.
They did. During a stop in Vicksburg, engineers discovered a faulty boiler that desperately needed replacing.
Uh-huh.
The boiler, the heart of the steamboat had a crack,
Right.
which could have caused a catastrophic explosion at any moment.
Oh, wow.
A proper replacement would have taken several days, but time was money.
Yeah.
And Captain J. Cass Mason, driven by the desire to maximize his profits, opted for a quick patch instead.
So instead of taking the time to ensure the safety of the vessel and the soldiers on board, they chose a quick fix to get back on the river and make more money.
Right.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
And it was this decision, combined with the already dangerous incentive to overcrowd, led to an absolutely horrifying situation.
Oh, yeah.
While the Sultana was legally allowed under 400 passengers,
Right.
over 2,000 soldiers were crammed on board 6 times capacity.
You think it's times capacity? It's almost impossible to imagine.
Yeah.
What must it have been like on that boat?
The decks were packed.
Oh, my goodness.
Men were struggling to stand. The hurricane deck, which is the topmost deck, was actually sagging under the sheer weight of all those people.
Oh, wow.
Stanchions or support beams had to be added to prevent it from collapsing.
So you have this incredibly overcrowded boat, a ticking time bomb in the form of a patched-up boiler, and thousands of soldiers eager to get home. What happens next?
On April 26th, the Sultana made a quick stop in Memphis for coal.
Okay.
There are even rumors of more hurried boiler repairs being done there.
Wow.
Finally, around midnight, it departed, heading north on the Mississippi River.
And this was no ordinary river journey, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
The Mississippi was swollen at the time due to melting snow,
Yeah.
making the current stronger and more treacherous. The stage was set for disaster.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Just a few hours into their journey, disaster struck around 2 a.m. on April 27th. That hastily patched boiler exploded quickly, followed by 2 more.
Oh, my goodness. It's hard to even imagine the terror that must have ensued.
The scene was chaotic and horrific. The explosions ripped through the ship fire, engulfed the wooden structure, and the smokestacks collapsed onto the already overcrowded hurricane deck to make matters worse. Many of the men were weakened from their time in prison camps, making escape even more challenging.
Were there any accounts from survivors that described what it was like during those terrifying moments?
Yes, there are some remarkable first-hand accounts that give us a glimpse into that night of horror. One that stands out is the story of Private Chester Berry. He described the moments leading up to the explosion, the men packed so tightly they could barely move the air thick with the anticipation of finally returning home. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The deafening roar of the boiler, the blinding flash, the feeling of being thrown through the air.
It's like being ripped from a dream and thrown into a nightmare.
Exactly. Barry was thrown into the icy water, along with hundreds of others. He described the frantic struggle to stay afloat amidst the debris, the screams of men burning alive, the chilling sight of bodies bobbing in the darkness. It's a testament to his will to survive that he managed to cling to a piece of wreckage and was eventually rescued.
It sounds like a scene from hell. It makes you wonder how anyone survived at all.
Another account that always leaves me shaken is from a soldier named John Walker. He was below deck when the first explosion occurred. He described the stampede of men rushing for the stairs, the crushing weight of bodies pressing against him as they fought for air in the smoke-filled compartments. He eventually made it to the upper deck, only to face another horrifying dilemma.
Wow.
The hurricane deck was completely ablaze, and men were jumping into the river in desperation, some already on fire.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking to survive years of war only to face such a horrifying end.
Walker's account is particularly tragic because he described seeing a friend badly burned, clinging to a piece of the paddle wheel and begging for help.
Oh, what happened? Was he able to save his friend?
Sadly, no. The current was too strong, and the heat from the fire was unbearable. Walker was forced to jump into the river himself, leaving his friend behind. These accounts highlight the impossible choices these men had to make in those moments of sheer terror, the agonizing decisions between self-preservation and trying to help those around them.
It's a stark reminder that amidst such chaos, survival often comes down to sheer luck.
Amidst the horror, there were also stories of heroism. Despite the chaos, rescue boats arrived remarkably quickly. The SS Bostonia, a nearby steamboat, reached the scene just an hour after the explosions. Other vessels, including the Arkansas Jerryland Essex and even the Navy gunboat USS Tyler, joined the rescue efforts. The Tyler was crewed by volunteers, hastily mobilized from Memphis, a testament to the human spirit of compassion, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy.
It's incredible to think that amidst such a disaster, there were people risking their own lives to save others.
It really speaks to the inherent goodness that can emerge even in the darkest of times. But sadly, despite the valiant rescue efforts, the loss of life was staggering. Officially, 1,547 lives were lost, but historians believe the true number is closer to 1,800.
That's an unimaginable loss. To put it in perspective, that's nearly as many Union soldiers who died in the Battle of Shiloh, one of the bloodiest battles of the entire Civil War.
And yet this event, with its massive death toll, remains largely unknown. It's been overshadowed by Lincoln's assassination and the end of the war, almost fading into a footnote in history.
It's baffling, isn't it? A tragedy of this scale, practically forgotten. It's often compared to the Titanic, a much smaller ship, a higher death toll, but nowhere near the same level of recognition. Why do you think that is?
There are a few theories. Some argue it's because the Sultana's passengers were mostly unknown soldiers, while the Titanic had wealthy, prominent figures on board. The media at the time likely played a role, too, focusing on the bigger stories of the day. Lincoln's assassination, the end of the war, the capture of John Wilkes Booth. It was a time of immense upheaval, and the Sultana disaster simply didn't capture the same level of attention.
It's a tragedy in itself that this event has been so overlooked. So, in the aftermath of this disaster, were there investigations? Was anyone held accountable for this immense loss of life?
There were actually two separate inquiries, both concluding that boiler mismanagement and gross overcrowding were the primary causes. But there was another theory that emerged, a fascinating what-if scenario, the Confederate cold torpedo theory. It's unproven, but the idea that a Confederate agent may have sabotaged the Sultana adds another layer of intrigue to this already complex story.
A Confederate cold torpedo that sounds almost too unbelievable to be true. Tell me more about that.
Well, picture a metal casing filled with gunpowder disguised as a lump of coal. It slipped into the Sultana's coal supply, eventually making its way into the boiler. Once the boiler heats up, the gunpowder ignites, causing a massive explosion.
Wow, that's a chilling thought. While it's just a theory, it certainly adds a dramatic twist to the story. But what about those who made the decisions that led to this disaster? Was anyone held responsible for the overcrowding and the faulty boiler?
Well, Captain Mason, who chose the quick fix for the boiler, perished in the disaster. The investigations didn't stop there. The focus shifted to Captain Frederick Speed, a Federal Army officer responsible for overseeing the transport of soldiers. He was accused of accepting bribes to allow the Sultana to be loaded far beyond its legal capacity.
So in a way, he was profiting from the very system that put those soldiers in danger.
Exactly. Speed was charged with neglect, and the charges were quite serious. He was accused of using the Sultana for private speculative purposes, essentially turning it into his personal money-making scheme.
So justice was served in the end.
Well, the outcome was a bit complicated. Speed's court-martial began in January 1866, and on June 9th, 1866, he was found guilty of neglect and dismissed from the army. But despite the magnitude of the tragedy, his punishment was considered relatively light by many. Some believe this was because similar corrupt practices were widespread among other officers, and the authorities didn't want to set a precedent that could implicate too many people.
It's almost as if the system itself was designed to protect those who exploited it.
What about the Sultana itself? What became of the wreckage after the disaster?
The Mississippi River is a powerful force constantly changing and reshaping the landscape for decades. The wreckage of the Sultana was lost to the murky depths, swallowed by the ever-shifting riverbed. But in 1982, a remarkable discovery was made underneath a soybean field, miles from where the river now flows. Archaeologists unearthed what is believed to be the Sultana's deck planks and timbers.
It's almost poetic in a way, isn't it? The river, both the source of the tragedy and the keeper of its secrets, eventually revealing a piece of this forgotten history. And this discovery reignited interest in the Sultana disaster. It became a tangible reminder of a tragedy that had been largely erased from public memory, prompting efforts to commemorate the victims and learn from the mistakes of the past.
It's like a message from history, reminding us that even when events are forgotten, the impact of human actions continues to reverberate. Speaking of remembering, let's shift gears for a moment and dive into the human side of this story. We've talked about the events, the investigations, but what about the individual experiences, the stories of the men who were on board that fateful night?
You're right, the human side of the story is crucial beyond the statistics and the historical context. It's the personal stories that truly bring this tragedy to life. And
Yeah.
thankfully, we have some remarkable accounts from survivors that allow us to glimpse into that night of horror, to understand what it was like to be on that overcrowded vessel, to experience the explosions, the fire, and the desperate fight for survival.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective when you hear those firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
It really makes you realize the human cost
Yeah.
of this disaster. And it makes me think,
Yeah.
what lessons can we learn from a tragedy like this? Were steps taken to prevent it from happening again?
Well, the Sultana disaster, despite being largely forgotten, did have a significant impact on steamboat safety regulations.
Oh, really?
The investigations that followed revealed a number of systemic failures
Uh-huh.
that contributed to the tragedy.
Yeah.
The government's $5 per head payment system,
Right.
while intended to expedite the return of soldiers,
Yeah.
clearly created a dangerous incentive for overcrowding.
Yeah. You can really see how that would happen.
Yeah, and the lack of stringent safety inspections and enforcement allowed steamboat companies to cut corners and prioritize profit over the well-being of passengers.
So in a way, the Sultana disaster served as a wake-up call, exposing the flaws in the system
Yeah.
and the need for greater oversight and accountability.
Precisely in the years following the disaster, there was a push for stricter regulations governing steamboat safety, including limits on passenger capacity, mandatory boiler inspections, and improved life-saving equipment on board.
So it sounds like they really did learn some valuable lessons
Yeah, they did.
from this terrible event.
And these reforms, while coming at a tragic cost, did help to improve steamboat safety and reduce the likelihood of such a large-scale disaster happening again.
It's a reminder that even from the ashes of such tragedies, some good can emerge.
Right.
But beyond those practical reforms, what broader lessons can we take away from this event?
Well, for me, the Sultana disaster is a story about the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of speaking truth to power.
Right.
Those in charge of the Sultana, from the captain to the army officials who oversaw the transport, prioritized profit over safety.
Yeah, it seems like that was a common theme.
Yeah, and those who might have had concerns that the soldiers crammed onto the overcrowded decks perhaps felt powerless to speak up or challenge those in authority.
It's a timeless lesson, isn't it? The importance of individual responsibility, of having the courage to speak up when we see something wrong, and of holding those in power accountable for their actions.
Absolutely. The Sultana disaster serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that even in a time of national celebration, even in the aftermath of a great victory, vigilance is crucial. We can't let our guard down when it comes to safety, accountability, and ethical behavior, no matter the circumstances.
It's also a reminder that history is not just a collection of facts and dates,
Right.
but a living tapestry woven from the stories of individuals.
It is.
And in the case of the Sultana, those stories for too long have been silenced, forgotten.
You're right.
So I guess that's why efforts to recover the wreckage,
Yeah.
to research and document the experiences of those on board are so important.
Absolutely. It's about giving voice to the voiceless, honoring the memory of those lost, and ensuring that this tragedy is not simply a footnote in history, but a powerful reminder of the human cost of negligence and the importance of learning from the past.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. The Sultana disaster, while tragic and largely forgotten, holds valuable lessons about safety accountability and the importance of remembering those who have been lost.
Right.
It's a story that deserves to be told,
It is.
and a tragedy that should compel us to strive for a world where such disasters are never repeated.
The Sultana disaster, with its echoes of human greed, systemic failures, and individual heroism, is a stark reminder that the past is not truly past. It shapes our present and informs our future. And by engaging with these difficult stories, by remembering those who perished and learning from their experiences, we can work towards a safer, more just, and more compassionate future.